The Sahun strike fleet went dark in the time it takes a heart to beat twice, and not one of the 211 ships sent a single word of warning before it died. Reader, you should understand who the Sahun were before you understand what happened to them. They were hunters, not in the soft way your own people might mean the word, but in the way a thing is built only to find warmth and end it. Their ships had no windows because they did not look, they felt. Across the cold black, they tracked the bloom of an engine, the breath of a reactor, the faint pink heat of living bodies pressed inside a hull, and they followed that warmth the way water follows the lowest ground. A Sahun hunter could feel a single living crew across a light day of empty space. They could tell a frightened reactor from a calm one. They could taste the difference between a warship running hot for battle and a freighter running warm with sleeping passengers. And they preferred the second, always, because the second did not fight back. For 900 years no fleet had ever escaped a Sahun hunt once it began. That number, 900, was carved into the side of every stalker hull as a promise to the dark. It was not a boast. The Sahun did not boast, because boasting is a thing you do to frighten an enemy, and the Sahun did not believe in enemies. They believed in prey. The number was a record, the way a tide line on a rock is a record, the simple cold mark of how high the water has always risen, and the certainty that it will rise that high again. 900 years, no escapes, every hunt closed. So when the Sahun reaping fleet locked onto a slow, fat, glowing convoy crossing the empty stretch the maps called the Ledgerway, the outcome was already written. Everyone in the 4 nearest empires knew it. The convoy was 31 ships, mostly soft ones, and they were running warm and loud and afraid. The 4 empires that watched it happen on their long-range instruments did not intervene, did not warn the convoy, did not so much as send a word of pity. They watched the way you watch weather. A storm had found a small boat. There was nothing to be done. There never was, with the Sahun. The convoy belonged to the humans. You have heard of the humans by now. Everyone has. But you have heard them spoken of the way children speak of a noise under the floor, half a rumor and half a dare. Most of the galaxy had never seen a human ship and did not want to. The stories were too strange and too contradictory to be believed, and too frequent to be ignored. In one telling, the humans were a small, frightened people who kept to a single dim corner of the rim and bothered no one. In another, they were a thing you did not provoke, a thing that had answers to questions no one had been brave enough to ask. The 4 empires that bordered the Ledgerway had quietly agreed, in rooms where no record was kept, that the best policy toward humanity was distance. Let them keep their corner. Do not knock on their door. Do not learn which of the stories was true, because both stories were frightening, and only one of them could be survived. The Sahun had not been in that room. The Sahun did not attend rooms. They had heard the rumors of the humans, the way they heard all rumors, as noise made by prey, and they had filed humanity under the only heading their minds had, which was warm, and therefore food, and therefore eventually theirs. The convoy that the reaping fleet found was not a war column. That is the part the survivors could never make their own people believe. It was a relief train. The lead vessel was a hospital ship called the Quiet Lantern, 1,100 meters of white hull, marked with a plain blue cross that meant nothing to the Sahun and everything to the humans. Behind it came supply haulers, water tankers, a seed barge, 2 ships full of nothing but folded tents and field beds. They were carrying help to a human colony on the far rim that had lost its sun to a flare and was freezing one family at a time. The convoy was warm because it was full of the sick and the cold and the dying. It glowed because mercy needs light to work by, and the Quiet Lantern's surgeries burned bright through every long shift, and the warmth of 2,000 huddled refugees poured off the hull like the heat off a banked fire. To the Sahun, that warmth was simply a feast, laid out and left unguarded. They did not see a hospital. A Sahun cannot see a hospital. They have no organ for it. They saw a heat bloom the size of a small city, slow, undefended, packed with soft, warm life, and the part of them that had been built across 10,000 generations to find exactly that, began, very quietly, to sing. The Reaping Fleet's lead hunter was a stalker named in their tongue something close to long patience. Her commander was a Sahun called Vor Kalin, and he was old, and he was certain. And certainty is the most expensive thing a hunter can carry. Vor Kalin had ended fleets in his time. He had run down a fleeing armada of the Cassock, and felt every one of their reactors go out under his claws like sparks pinched between fingers. He had hunted the long pilgrim trains of the Orsal, and emptied them so cleanly that the Orsal stopped making pilgrimages. He had a hull marked not with the standard 900 years, but with his own private count, hunt by hunt. A record so long it ran from the prow to the engine ports, and he read it sometimes the way you might read a familiar prayer, not for the meaning, but for the comfort of the shape. He read the convoy's heat the way you might read a face, soft, slow, frightened, unarmed. There was no warship in the column. He checked 3 times, because Vor Kalin was old enough to check, and 3 times his hunt sense told him the same thing. 31 soft hulls. 2,000 warm bodies, not one weapon hot, not one reactor running for war. The richest, easiest, most defenseless feast he had locked onto in 40 years, and it was running straight away from him into the empty ledgerway, as if running could save it, which it never had, not once, in 900 years. He gave the order to close. 211 stalker hulls slid out of the dark and began to fold the distance, and the convoy did exactly what prey does. It did not turn to fight. It did not scatter cleverly. It ran straight, dead straight, toward a smudge of nothing on the Sahun charts, and it screamed for help on every open channel in 100 languages, and Vor Kalin tasted the fear in those signals and was glad. He let the convoy run. A hunt is sweeter when the prey believes for a little while that running is a plan. He had learned long ago that the warmth of a thing rises when it is afraid, that terror makes a body burn brighter, and so a hunter who is patient does not strike the moment he can. He waits. He lets the fear build. He lets the feast cook itself in its own panic, and then he eats it at the peak. There was one human voice in all that screaming that did not sound afraid, and Vor Kalin, who had heard 10,000 species beg, noticed it the way you notice a single still tree in a storm. It was not louder than the others. It was quieter. It did not climb the channels begging for the empires to intervene. It came on a low old frequency, flat and steady, the voice of someone reading instructions rather than pleading for life, and something in the back of the old hunter's mind, the part that had kept him alive for 40 years, twitched at the wrongness of it, before his certainty smoothed the twitch away. The voice belonged to a woman. The Sahun did not know her name then. You will. She was not a captain. She was not a soldier. She was the chief surgeon of the Quiet Lantern, and her name was Dr. Hella Marn, and she was the one who, 11 hours before the Sahun found them, had stood in her white surgery, with both hands, inside a freezing child's chest, and felt the convoy's engines change pitch as the captain pushed them past safe speed. She had known then that something was wrong. She had not panicked. Surgeons who panic kill people. She had finished the child first. She had closed the small chest and warmed the small hands, and watched the small heart find its rhythm, and only then, with her gloves still red, had she walked to the wall and keyed a channel the rest of the convoy did not know existed. Now, with 211 hunters folding toward her ships, Dr. Hella Marn keyed that old channel again, and she did not scream. She spoke 6 words, slowly, the way you read a name off a stone so you do not get it wrong. She said, "Ledgerway, Blue Cross, we are warm." Then she went back to her patients, because there was nothing else for her hands to do, and because she trusted the 6 words the way you trust a thing you have seen work before and pray never to need again. She had been a young medic the last time those words were spoken in anger on this road. She had not spoken them herself. She had only heard the recording, once, in a quiet room, from a woman older than she was now, who had told her that there were 2 kinds of people who crossed the Ledgerway, and that the words decided which kind you were allowed to remain. Vor Kalin heard those 6 words. He did not understand them. His translators turned them into nonsense, a weather report, a child's rhyme, a fragment about color and temperature with no threat in it anywhere. He filed them away as the babble of the doomed, and gave the order to take the convoy. The fear had built long enough. The feast was at its peak. It was time to eat. It is worth telling you, before the dark changes, who was aboard the convoy, because the Sahun never asked, and that not asking is half of what undid them. The quiet lantern carried 400 patients in its long white wards, most of them children, all of them refugees from the colony whose sun had flared, pulled out in the first evacuation, and now being carried back as the colony was rebuilt. There was a ward of the very old, who remembered a warmer world. There was a ward of the newly born, 11 of them, who had never seen anything but the inside of a hospital ship. There were 200 relief workers, who had volunteered for a cold posting at the edge of the maps, because someone had to go, and a galley crew, who had not slept properly in 9 days, and a chaplain of 3 faiths, who held the hands of the dying in whichever shape comforted them. None of these were soldiers. Not one of them could have fired a weapon if you had put it in their hands. They were exactly the kind of warm, soft, helpless thing the Sahun had spent 10,000 generations learning to find, and the Sahun found them, and to the Sahun that was the whole story, beginning and end. What the Sahun could not know, because they had never thought to learn it, was that the humans had been here before. Not these humans. Others, 400 years gone, on this same road, carrying the same kind of help to the same kind of dying. And what had happened to those others was the reason a thing now waited in the cold that the reaping fleet was about to meet. The convoy running ahead of the Sakun was not afraid the way prey is afraid. It was afraid the way a person is afraid, who knows exactly what is about to happen next, and knows, too, that it will not happen to them. That is a different kind of fear. It is the fear of witnessing. Dr. Hella Marn carried it in her flat, steady voice, and the captain of the Quiet Lantern carried it in his hands on the helm, and every soul on that convoy who was old enough to understand carried it, because they had all been told, before they ever signed aboard a ship that crossed the Ledgerway, what kept the road, and what it was for, and what they would see if a hunter ever came. The first Sahun claws reached the seed barge at the tail of the column. They did not even fire. The Sahun did not waste fire on soft hulls. They simply closed, and a boarding lance crossed the dark to drink the barge's heat directly, the way they had drunk 1,000 warm ships before, and the barge's crew of 46 waited at their stations with their hands open, because Dr. Marn had told them, calmly, an hour ago, that the safest thing they could do was nothing. Do not run, she had said. Do not fight. Do not even pray loudly. Just be warm, and be still, and trust the road. That was the moment the dark changed. Reader, hold on to your certainty here, because Vor Kalin held on to his, and his certainty is the reason there is anyone left of the Sahun at all to tell this. 211 stalker hulls had a feast laid before them, and 900 years of promise carved in their flanks. They felt no other warmth in the void. Their hunt sense, the finest instrument any predator had ever evolved, the thing they trusted above their own eyes, told them there was nothing in the ledgerway but 31 frightened soft ships, and the cold in themselves. Their hunt sense was wrong. There was one more thing in the ledgerway. It had been there a long time, and it ran cold on purpose, so that hunters who tracked warmth would slide right past it and never know. The seed barge's hull was breached. The boarding lance bit. The 46 aboard kept their hands open. And then, behind the convoy, where the Sahun charts showed only empty distance and the faint smudge they had ignored, something that had been holding very still for a very long time opened its eyes. The first thing the Sahun noticed was that the smudge on their charts was not a smudge. A Sahun gunner aboard the trailing stalker called Cold Appetite reported it first, and his report was not a warning, because the Sahun had no word that meant warning in the way you would need one here. He simply said the empty place behind the convoy had a shape now. It had not folded in. It had not lit an engine. It had not done any of the 1,000 things a ship does when it arrives. It had merely stopped being invisible, the way a held breath stops being silent when it is finally let go. One instant the charts showed clean, empty distance. The next instant, the distance had an edge, and the edge had a length, and the length kept growing as more of the instruments agreed that something was there that had not been there, and yet somehow had always been there, waiting in the place where no one had thought to look. The shape was long. The Sahun's first measurement put it at 3,000 meters, then corrected to 4, then refused to settle, because the thing's edges did not reflect their hunt sense cleanly. It drank their probing, the way a deep well drinks a dropped coin. Where every other hull in the galaxy gave back a clear, bright echo of heat and metal, this one gave back almost nothing. It was cold, not cold like a dead ship is cold. A dead ship still glows faintly with the last of itself for centuries, a slow fading warmth that a Sahun could read like a fingerprint. This was cold like the space around it, cold by choice and by craft, cold in a way that had taken some grim, patient species a very long time to learn how to build. The hull did not leak heat. It did not leak light. It did not leak the small, constant breath of a living reactor that every other vessel in creation could not help but exhale. It simply sat in the dark, the same temperature as the dark, 4,000 meters of nothing you could feel, and the only reason the Sahun knew it was there at all was that the stars behind it had stopped. The Sahun had no name for it, so they did the thing predators do with what they cannot name. They decided it was nothing, and they kept eating. Vor Kalin ordered the hunt to continue. He had felt a great many strange things in 40 years. He had felt ships that ran cold to hide, and he had hunted every one of them down, because a thing that hides from a Sahun is a thing that has already admitted it is prey. The seed barge was already breached. The quiet lantern and the rest of the soft column were folding toward open distance, slow, and his stalkers were faster, and the cold shape behind them had not fired, had not moved, had not so much as turned to face the fleet. To a hunter, a thing that does not run and does not strike is a thing that is already dead and does not know it yet, or a thing too frozen with fear to do anything but wait. He gave the cold shape exactly as much thought as that, and no more, and ordered 9 of his stalkers to peel off and consume it on the way past, the way you might crush an egg you happen to step near. "Take it," he said. "Take it and catch up. The feast is ahead." 9 stalker hulls turned toward the cold ship. Each of them was 800 meters of hunting muscle, each crewed by warriors who had felt 100 reactors die. They were not the youngest of the fleet, and not the rashest. They were veterans, chosen for a simple kill, and they approached the cold ship with the unhurried confidence of creatures who had never once been surprised by a thing that ran cold. They closed the distance. They extended their boarding lances, those long, pale instruments that drank heat directly from a hull's heart. They reached for the cold ship, the way they had reached for the seed barge, and the way they had reached for the cassock and the orsel, and 10,000 warm, soft things before. The cold ship let them get very close. Reader, this is where you must slow down, because Vorkaleen did not, and that is the whole of his lesson. The cold ship did not flinch from the 9 hunters. It did not raise a shield, or charge a gun, or broadcast a threat. It did not run. It did not so much as adjust its position. It simply began, very quietly, to do the one thing the Sahuhun had built their entire civilization around, never having to think about. It got colder. The 9 stalkers' boarding lances drank heat from a hull's heart. That was their whole art. They found warmth, and they pulled it out. And the pulling killed. Because a living crew and a living reactor are only warm so long as they hold their warmth. And a thing that takes the warmth away takes the life with it. But you cannot pull warmth from a thing that has no warmth to give. The lances bit into the cold ship's flank and found, where every other hull in 900 years had offered up a living reactor's heat, only a falling. There was nothing to drink, and worse than nothing, because the cold ship did not merely refuse to give. It pulled the heat the other way. It drank from the lances. It drank from the stalkers. It reached back up those 9 pale instruments the way a frostbitten night reaches in through an open door, and the warmth that the Sahuan had spent their whole lives learning to steal began, all 9 at once, to flow out of them and into the dark, patient thing they had tried to eat. The lances, which had only ever carried heat one direction, became roads that ran both ways. And on the far end of those roads sat something vast and cold and unhurried that had been waiting 400 years for exactly this. And it began, with no apparent effort, to empty 9 hunters out. The first stalker's reactor did not explode. That was the horror of it. The Sahuan knew explosions. An explosion is a hunter's death, and there is honor in it. A reactor breach is a clean, bright ending, and a Sahuan who dies in one, dies as a Sahuan should. This was not that. The first stalker simply cooled. Its reactor temperature fell off a cliff. Its lights browned. The air inside it thinned toward frost. Its boarding lance, still locked to the cold ship, became a straw through which all its heat was being calmly and steadily emptied into something that did not even seem to be trying very hard. The crew felt the cold come up through the deck plates. They felt their own breath turn white in front of them. They reached to release the lance and found the release frozen. They tried to fire their engines and found the reactor too cold to push. They were predators who had ended fleets, and they died the death they had given 1,000 others, slowly, in the dark, drained, the warmth leaving their bodies and their ship and their world. And they never landed a single blow on the thing that did it. The last thing they felt was the cold, and the cold was patient, and the cold was theirs now, taken back. 9 stalkers went cold and silent in 19 seconds. Vorkaleen saw 9 of his hunters drop off the fleet net and felt, for the first time in his long life, something he did not have a word for either. It was not fear. Hunters do not fear. It was the absence of the certainty he had carried so long that he had stopped noticing its weight, and the absence of it was like the floor of his ship vanishing. 9 ships gone, no explosions, no wreckage spreading, no enemy fire to track back to its source. Just 9 warm marks on his hunt sense gone cold, one after another, in 19 seconds, while the thing that did it sat exactly where it had sat, exactly the temperature of the dark, having neither moved, nor brightened, nor given any sign at all that it had done anything except continue to exist. He did the thing a great hunter does when he does not understand. He committed harder. He turned the whole reaping fleet, all 202 hulls that remained, away from the soft convoy and onto the cold ship, because a hunter, who cannot eat a thing, must at least be the one to kill it, and a fleet that loses 9 to a single hull and then turns away has admitted that the hull is the hunter and the fleet is the prey, and that was a thing no Sahun could survive admitting. He poured fire into the dark patient shape from 202 stalkers at once, not boarding lances now. Fire, the real weapons, the bright violent ones the Sahun kept for the rare prey that fought back, 202 batteries opening together on a single point in the dark. The cold ship took the fire. You will not believe the next part. The Sahun who lived did not believe it either, and they were watching it through their own instruments. 202 stalker batteries opened on the cold ship, and the space around it turned white, a sphere of raw violence bright enough that for an instant the ledgerway had a second sun, and the Sahun gunners felt the savage joy of a fleet finally doing the thing it was built for, the joy of overwhelming force brought down on a single helpless point. And when the white faded, the cold ship was exactly where it had been, exactly the shape it had been, untouched, uncaring, 4,000 meters of dark, unhurried patience that had not so much as rolled to spread the damage, because there was no damage to spread. It had not raised a shield. The Sahun checked. They checked frantically. Every instrument they had, because a thing that takes 200 batteries and stands unmarked must have a shield, must have something, and there was nothing. No field, no barrier, no flare of absorbed energy bleeding off the edges. The fire had simply arrived at the hull and been swallowed, drunk, taken the way the lances had been taken, and somewhere deep in the cold ship, something grew very slightly warmer, and then cooled that warmth away too, the way you would set down a cup of tea you did not intend to drink. The most violent thing 200 Sahun hunters could do, the full fury of a fleet that had ended fleets, had been received by the cold ship the way the ground receives rain. It took it. It kept it. It was not even inconvenienced. It was at this point, reader, that one Sahun aboard the flagship did the unthinkable, and because she did it, you and I know what the rest of the galaxy still does not. Her name was Senna Tiruk. She was young, a heat reader, the one whose whole job was to listen to the warmth of the void and tell the hunters where to bite. The heat readers were the eyes of a people with no eyes, and Senna Tiruk was good. Good enough to ride the flagship, good enough that Vorkaleen knew her by name, which was rare for one so young. And Senna Tiruk had been listening to the cold ship the entire time, not with her fleet sense, which gave her nothing, but with the old patient instruments her grandmother had taught her to keep when everyone else threw them away, the ones that listened to signals instead of heat. Her grandmother had been a heat reader too, in a stranger time, before the Sahun were quite so sure of everything, and she had told the child Senna that warmth was not the only thing in the dark worth listening to, that the universe spoke in many voices, and a reader who heard only one of them was deaf to the rest. Senna had kept the old instrument out of love more than belief. Now she clutched it and listened, and what it told her made the joy of the fleet around her curdle into something cold long before the rest of them learned to be afraid. Her grandmother had died believing the Sahun were going to learn something terrible one day, and had never been able to say what. The old reader had spent her last years half in disgrace, because she insisted that the dark was full of signals the fleet refused to hear, that the empires of warmth were deaf, in a way that would cost them, that somewhere out past the comfortable hunting reaches, there were peoples who did not fight the way the Sahun fought, and could not be understood by a creature that only knew how to find heat. The young Senna had sat at her grandmother's feet and listened to all of it, the way the young listen to the old, with love and a little embarrassment, certain it was the wandering of a mind that had read the dark too long. She had taken the instrument when her grandmother died, because it would have hurt to throw it away, and she had carried it onto the flagship more as a keepsake than a tool. And the other heat readers had laughed at it, the way Masoon had laughed at it that very morning. An old box that listened for voices in a void where everyone knew there were only prey and predators and the warmth that flowed between them. Now, on the Bridge of Long Patience, with the cold ship sitting unmarked in the middle of 200 batteries worth of fire, Senna Tiruk understood that her grandmother had not been wrong and had not been mad. She had only been early. She had heard the edge of a thing the fleet was now flying straight into the heart of, and she had tried to warn a people who had no organ for warning, and she had died unheard, and her granddaughter was about to watch the whole cost of that deafness paid in a single afternoon. Senna held the old box tighter and made herself a promise, there, before the killing even started in earnest, that whatever happened in the next minutes, she would not die deaf, and she would not let what she heard die with her. She had been hearing 6 words on a loop the whole time. Ledgerway, Blue Cross. We are warm. The human surgeon's flat, steady voice, repeating, not pleading, not afraid, simply stating, the way you state a thing that is already arranged. And she had been hearing something else underneath them, faint, old, a second signal, coming not from the convoy but from the cold ship itself, a slow, steady pulse that her instruments insisted had been broadcasting into the empty ledgerway for longer than the Sahun reaping fleet had existed. It was not a war signal. It was not a hunt call. It was, as near as her grandmother's instrument could shape it, a single repeated phrase, patient as a heartbeat, aimed at no one and everyone. And it had been saying the same thing into the dark for what the timestamps claimed was 400 years. 400 years. The number did not fit inside Senna Tiruk's chest. The cold ship had been here, awake or near enough, speaking the same words into the empty crossing, since before her grandmother's grandmother had read her first heat. The phrase the cold ship had been whispering to the empty ledgerway for 4 centuries was this: anyone may pass who comes in peace. We are only here for the warm ones who hunt. Senna Tiruk understood, in the way you understand a thing all at once, and feel sick, that the cold ship had not come to save the human convoy. The cold ship had been here the whole time. The ledgerway was not an empty crossing the convoy was fleeing across. It was a door, and the humans had built a guardian for that door so long ago that 4 empires had forgotten the door was even theirs, and the convoy had not been running for its life at all. The convoy had been walking home, slowly, under the eye of a thing that had been keeping that road for 400 years, and the only ones in any danger on the ledgerway were the ones who came to hunt the warm. She tried to tell Vorkaline. She climbed the chain of the flagship with her grandmother's instrument cradled in both arms, and she told the old hunter that the cold ship had been speaking, that it had given them passage, that it had asked only that they not hunt, that they were not the predators in the ledgerway, and had never been. She played him the 4th-century whisper. She played him the 6 words. She told him, in the plain, frightened voice of someone who has seen the shape of the truth and knows no one will thank her for it, that the fleet had not stumbled onto helpless prey. It had walked, knowing or not, onto a road that belonged to a thing that had told everyone, for 400 years, how to be safe, and the only rule was do not come here to hunt the helpless. Vorkaline, who had ended fleets, who had carved his own private count from prow to engine ports, who had just watched 9 of his hunters go cold without landing a blow and the cold ship eat 200 batteries without a mark, looked at the young heat reader holding her dead grandmother's machine and made the choice that hunters make. He decided the cold ship was lying. He decided the 6 words and the 4-century whisper were a trap to make the reaping fleet hesitate. A clever human weapon designed to freeze a hunter's nerve with words, because words cost nothing, and a moment's hesitation could be the difference. He decided that the thing that had cooled 9 of his stalkers without trying was something that could be killed if only enough warmth was poured into it, because his whole life had taught him that warmth was the weapon and the cold was only the absence of it. And a hunter, who has been right for 900 years, cannot let himself be wrong in front of his fleet. He told Senna Tiruk to take her grandmother's superstition off his bridge. He told her that the dark had no voices, only prey that had not been caught yet. He told her that the cold ship would burn like everything burned. Ashtin Senna Tiruk. He ordered the reaping fleet to ram. 202 stalker hulls turned their boarding lances inward, locked their engines to full, and threw themselves bodily at the cold ship, because if they could not drain it, and could not burn it, they would at least crush it under the weight of the largest predator fleet in the 4 empires. 202 hunters falling on a single cold shape, like an avalanche falling on a stone. It was the oldest hunt there was, the hunt of mass, the certainty that nothing in creation can stand under the full weight of the Sahuan thrown all at once. They had crushed worlds this way. They had crushed fleets. They came on, all of them, engines screaming hot, the warmest the cold ship had ever seen them, every reactor burning at the edge of breach to close the distance faster, 200 suns falling on a single patient shadow. The cold ship watched them come, the way the stone watches the avalanche. And then, for the first time since it had opened its eyes, it moved. It did not move toward them. It did not move away. It rotated, slowly, with no engine flare, no reaction mass, no sign at all of how it turned, until its long dark flank faced the oncoming fleet, the way a hand turns palm out to say stop. And along that flank, ports that had been cold and dark and dead for 400 years, began, one by one, in a line that ran the whole 4,000 meters of the hull, to open. They opened without light. They opened without sound. They opened the way eyes open, slow and deliberate, hundreds of them down the length of the cold ship, and the Sahun, hurtling toward them at the edge of breach, finally felt the first thing that was not certainty. The Sahun expected guns. They braced for guns. Guns they understood. What came out of the cold ship's opened ports was not light, and was not fire, and was not anything the Sahuan had a word for. It was cold, shaped. It was the absence of heat made into a thing that could be aimed, a long-reaching nothing that crossed the closing distance faster than the stalkers could fold, and where it touched a hull, the hull did not break. It went still. Every stalker the reaching cold touched simply stopped, mid-charge, its engines frozen, its lances frozen, its warriors frozen at their stations with frost climbing up the inside of the glass. A fleet of hunters turned in an instant into a field of cold, dark monuments to their own certainty, still flying forward on the momentum they had thrown into the charge, dead and drifting, and perfectly, terribly intact. There was no wreckage. There was no fire. There was no scream loud enough to carry. There was only, all down the length of the avalanche, a silence, spreading hull by hull, a great rushing fleet going cold from the inside out, 200 suns guttering one after another into 200 cold dark stones that kept falling forward toward the stone they had thought to crush, and missed it, and drifted on past into the empty ledgerway forever. It happened so fast and so quietly that the human convoy, still folding away toward its frozen colony, never saw it at all. There was no flash to draw the eye, no shockwave to ride out, no debris to scatter across the dark. The largest predator fleet in the 4 empires simply changed, in 4 seconds, from a roaring avalanche of warmth into a still cold field, and the change was so total and so silent that a soft ship passing a light hour away would have read only that the ledgerway, which had been very warm for a moment, was now exactly as cold as it had always been. Senna Tiruk read every one of the 4 seconds with her grandmother's instrument, and because she was a heat reader, she felt them die the way no one else aboard could feel them. She felt the warmth go out of 200 ships the way you might feel 200 candles snuffed one after another by a hand moving down a long table, faster than counting, each small light there and then not there, and underneath every snuffed light a crew she had eaten beside, navigators she had traded charts with, gunners whose warmth she had read 1,000 times and learned to know the way you know a voice. She felt Threll go cold, who had taught her the old folds. She felt Masoon go cold, who had laughed at her grandmother's instrument only that morning. She felt the whole warm, familiar net of her life gutter out in 4 seconds, and the cold thing that took them did not hurry, and did not gloat, and did not even seem to notice that the warmth it drank had names. That was the part that broke something in her, and built something else in its place. The cold ship was not cruel. Cruelty would have been bearable, because cruelty is a thing a hunter understands, a thing with appetite and intention and pleasure in it. The cold ship had no pleasure. It took the warmth the fleet threw at the helpless, and it gave that warmth back to no one, and it returned to its stillness, and the not caring of it, the sheer patient indifference of a thing that would have let every one of them pass untouched if they had only crossed in peace, was more terrible than any malice the Sahu Han had ever shown their own prey. They had hunted with joy. The thing that ended them had felt nothing but the calm of a door closing on a hand that should not have reached through it. Senna Tiruk watched 200 stalkers go cold in the space of 4 seconds, and she did not look away, because someone had to remember it correctly, and she already knew that the empires would not. When the 4 seconds were over, 2 ships of the Sahuan reaping fleet were still warm. One was the flagship, the stalker called Long Patience, with Vor Kalin on her bridge. The other was a small scout at the very back of the formation, the Cold Appetite, with Senna Tiruk aboard. 2 ships out of 211. The cold ship had reached out and stilled every hull between them, and had left exactly those 2 breathing, and Senna Tiruk understood why before her commander did, though it would take him longer than it should to admit it. The cold ship had spared the 2 that had hesitated, not the strongest, not the fastest, not the 2 that had fought hardest, because fighting hardest was exactly the thing that got the others killed. The flagship, because the flagship had given the order to ram, and the cold ship wanted the one who gave the order to live with what the order had done, and the scout, because the scout had been the only Sahuan in the entire fleet to listen, to understand, to climb the chain, and try to stop it. The cold ship had heard Senna Tiruk's grandmother's instrument the way it heard everything, every signal, every whisper, every word across the dark, and it had decided, with whatever patience ran in its dark, cold heart, that the one who had tried to keep the peace would be allowed to carry the story. Senna Tiruk sat in the cold scout and understood that she had been chosen, not for mercy exactly, for a task. The cold ship had not saved her because her life was precious. It had saved her because someone had to go home and be believed, and she was the only one aboard the whole reaping fleet who had heard the truth before the killing started, and would therefore tell it straight. She had been spared the way you spare the one witness who will testify honestly. It was the loneliest gift she had ever received, and she received it sitting in a freezing scout, surrounded by 200 drifting cold hulls full of warriors she had eaten beside that very morning, and she did not weep, because she understood that weeping was a thing for later, and that her first duty now was to remember. Vor Kalin did not feel spared. He felt accused. He stood on the bridge of long patience, surrounded by the cold ghosts of his own fleet, 200 drifting hulls, full of frozen warriors, who had followed his certainty into the dark. And he looked at the long patient shape that had done this without anger, without triumph, without so much as turning to gloat. And the old hunter felt the floor of his whole life finish vanishing. He had carved his count from prow to engine ports. He had been right for 40 years. He had given an order, the simplest order a hunter ever gives: take the prey. And the prey had taken 200 of his hunters, and left them whole and cold, and drifting, where his fleet could see them forever, and there was no enemy to charge, no wreckage to mourn, no fire to point to, and say that is how it happened. There was only the long, cold, patient shape and his own order, hanging in the silence between them. He did the last thing his certainty had left him. He demanded to speak to it. He opened every channel his flagship had, and he threw his voice across the cold gap, and he demanded, in the tongue of a species that had ended fleets for 900 years, to know what the cold ship was. Not who, what. He did not ask its name, because to a hunter, a name is a thing you give to prey you have caught, and he had caught nothing. He asked what kind of thing could drink a hunt's warmth, and freeze an avalanche, and whisper peace into an empty road for 4 centuries, and call that mercy. He demanded the cold ship account for itself to the fleet it had just killed. There was rage in it, and there was the wreck of a lifetime's certainty in it, and underneath both, though he would never have admitted it, there was the small lost voice of a creature who has just learned that everything he knew about the dark was only the part of the dark that had not yet decided to answer him. The cold ship answered him. It did not answer in the Sahuun tongue, though Senatiruk would later swear it could have, because a thing that had listened to 4 empires for 400 years could surely speak any tongue it pleased. It answered in the plain, flat human speech the convoy had been screaming in, and the voice that came across was not a captain's voice, and not a soldier's voice. It was the voice of Dr. Helamarn, chief surgeon of the Quiet Lantern, patched through from the hospital ship to the Cold Guardian by the old channel only she had known existed, because the humans had decided, long ago, that when their cold sentinel finally spoke, after 400 years of silence, it should not speak in the voice of a warrior. It should speak in the voice of someone whose whole life was spent keeping the warm ones warm. The humans had thought about this. They had thought about everything. That, more than the cold, more than the stilled fleet, was the thing that finally reached Vorkaleen, that the humans had planned, centuries ago, for the voice that would speak to a defeated hunter, to be a healer's voice, so that the lesson would land as the humans meant it to land. Dr. Helamarn said, "You want to know what it is? I will tell you, because you are going to carry this home, and I need you to carry it right." She said, "It is ours. We built it. We do not name it where you can hear, because a name is a thing you can hunt, and we did not build it to be hunted. We built it to keep a road," she said. 400 of your years ago, a fleet like yours found a human relief column on this crossing. The same crossing, carrying the same kind of help to the same kind of dying. That fleet did to that column exactly what you came here to do to mine. They drank the warmth out of 900 sick and frozen people, and they called it a hunt, and they went home, and carved a number on their hulls. They did not know what they had eaten. They did not care. To them it was warmth, and warmth was theirs. We do not even know to this day which of the old powers it was, because they never bragged of it, because to them, it was not worth bragging about. It was a feast on an empty road. They forgot it before they were home. She said, "We did not forget it. We found the column where it had been left. 900 frozen souls drifting on the ledgerway, every one of them whole and cold and intact. Because that is what your kind of killing leaves behind. Bodies with the warmth taken out and nothing else touched. We brought them home. We learned, eventually, roughly where they had been hunted, and we learned what had hunted them, a kind of thing that tracks warmth and drinks it, and leaves the cold behind. And then we had to decide what to do, and that decision is the thing I most need you to carry home, because your people will not believe the part that comes next. She said, "We did not go to their worlds and burn them. That is what you would have done. That is what you expected us to do, which is why 4 empires keep their distance from us and tell each other it is wisdom. They think we are a thing that pays a death with 10 deaths. They have built their whole careful distance around the idea that we are exactly as cruel as they are, only stronger, and that the safe thing is to never give us a reason. They are wrong about us. We are something they cannot imagine, and that is why they fear us more than they would fear a thing they understood." She said, "We did something else. We built a thing that runs colder than the dark, and we set it on this road, and we taught it to let anyone pass who comes in peace, and to whisper that promise into the empty crossing, every hour of every day for as long as the crossing exists, so that no one could ever say they were not warned. And we told it to wait. Just wait. For 400 years it has waited, and in 400 years it has not stopped a single trader, a single pilgrim, a single lost soul who crossed the ledgerway without meaning harm. Thousands have passed under it, and never knew it was there. Whole generations of your own merchants have crossed this road and gone home and told their children the ledgerway was a safe crossing, and they were right, and they never once suspected why. It only ever wakes for one thing." She said, "It wakes for hunters who come to drink the warmth out of the helpless. That is the only warmth it will ever take, yours. Not because you are Sahuan. We did not build it to hate Sahuan. We did not know it would be Sahuan. We built it to take the warmth of anyone, of any people, who comes to this road to feed on the weak, and to give that warmth back to no one, and to leave the rest of creation completely alone. It is the most precise thing we have ever made. It has exactly one appetite, and you walked into it, and it ate." Vorkaleen, on the Bridge of Long Patience, surrounded by his frozen fleet, asked the question that the empires would spend years refusing to ask. He asked why it had let him live. And Dr. Hella Marn, with both her hands still smelling of the freezing child's blood, told him the truth that no empire wanted. She said, "Because killing you would make us the fleet from 400 years ago. We did not build a hunter. We built a door that stays shut to hunters and open to everyone else. The door does not chase. It does not go to your worlds. It does not carve numbers. It waited here for you to choose, and you chose to ram a thing that had told you 400 years worth of times to simply pass. Your fleet is cold because of what your fleet decided. You are warm because we decided that someone should go home and say what is true, so that the next fleet does not have to learn it the way yours did. If we wanted you dead, we would have let the ship take all 211. It wanted to. It is very old, and it has watched the warmth taken out of a great many helpless things, and it does not love your kind of hunger. We held it back. Remember that. We are the reason you are breathing. The mercy is ours. The ship would have taken you too." She said one more thing, and Senatiruk wrote it down exactly, and it is the reason this account exists. She said, "We are not your nightmare. We are the thing your nightmare runs into when it goes looking for the weak. Carry that home. Tell them the ledgerway is open. Tell them the only ones who die on it are the ones who come to feed. And tell them one thing more, because they will want to make a weapon of this. They will want to find the cold ship and study it and build their own. And you must tell them it will not work. The cold is not the weapon. The waiting is the weapon. The promise is the weapon. Anyone can build a thing that kills. We built a thing that warns for 400 years first, and then only takes back exactly what is thrown at the helpless, and not one drop more. That is not a machine your people know how to make, because to make it, you would first have to become the kind of people who would rather warn 1,000 times than kill once. Become that, and you will not need the cold ship. Refuse to become that, and the cold ship is all you will ever meet of us. Then the channel closed, and the cold ship did not speak again. Vorkaleen stood a long time on his cold, bright bridge in the middle of his cold, dark fleet. He was a hunter who had been right for 40 years, and wrong in 4 seconds, and there is no instrument in any empire that can measure what that does to such a creature. He had carved his count from prow to engine ports, and the dark had answered him with 200 frozen monuments to that count, every one of them a warrior who had trusted him, every one of them whole and intact and reachable, so that he could fly his flagship slowly down the length of his dead fleet, and see each frozen face at its station if he wished. And he did wish, because a hunter who has caused this must look at it, and he looked at all of it, every hull, the whole long, slow funeral procession of his own certainty. He flew long patience slowly down the whole length of the dead fleet, and Senatiruk's scout followed at a distance, and the procession took the better part of an hour, because 200 ships is a very long thing to fly past when each of them is a tomb. The cold hulls drifted at every angle, frozen in the postures of the charge, lances still extended, engines still flared in the shape of their final burn, and through the unfogged glass here and there, Vorkaleen could see his warriors at their stations, perfectly preserved, frost on their eyes, their hands still on the controls that had carried them into the cold. They had not suffered the way fire makes a creature suffer. They had simply gone still, mid-thought, mid-order, mid-life, and the stillness was so complete and so gentle that it was obscene, because gentleness is the last thing a Sahun expects from the thing that kills him, and a Sahun does not know how to grieve a death that came without violence. There was nothing to avenge. That was the worst of it. Vengeance needs a wound, and the cold ship had left no wound, only an absence, and you cannot avenge an absence. You can only carry it. Somewhere down that long, cold procession, Vorkaleen stopped the flagship beside a single hull, a stalker called Faithful Reach, and Senatiruk understood, without being told, that it had been someone he loved, a hunt brother of 40 years perhaps, or a child grown into a commander. The old hunter said nothing on any channel. He simply held the flagship there, beside the cold hull, for a long while, and then he moved on, because the procession had to end somewhere, and there was no station along it where a hunter could rest. When at last he reached the end of the dead fleet, and the empty dark opened in front of him, he did not turn back for another look. A creature only flies the length of its own funeral once. He could have died there. Senatiruk, watching from the scout, was sure for a moment that he would, that the old hunter would point long patience at the cold ship and throw himself onto it the way the fleet had, so as not to be the one who lived. It would have been the easier thing. It would have been the hunter's thing. A Sahuhun who loses his fleet is supposed to join it. The dark is supposed to take him too. To live is the shameful path, and Vorkaleen had never in his life chosen a shameful path over an honorable death. He did not do it, and the reason he did not, the reason Senatiruk respected him for the rest of her life, even though she never forgave him, was the cruelest gift the cold ship gave anyone that day. Dr. Marn had taken the hunter's death away from Vorkaleen. She had told him, before the channel closed, exactly why he was spared, and once a hunter knows he was spared on purpose, to carry a truth, dying becomes the cowardly thing, and living becomes the price. If he flew into the cold ship now, the truth died with him, and the next fleet learned it the hard way, and the next. And the deaths went on. The only way to make the 200 mean anything was to carry the lesson home alive and make sure no fleet ever earned it again. The humans had not just spared him. They had handed him a duty heavier than dying, and they had done it on purpose, because they understood, in a way the Sahuan never had, that the cruelest and kindest thing you can give a proud creature is a reason to live that he cannot honorably refuse. So Vorkaleen turned long patience around. He gathered the two warm ships, his flagship and Senatiruk scout, and he left 200 frozen stalkers drifting in the ledgerway, as the cold ship had left them, intact, undamaged, perfect, because the cold ship had not destroyed them, and there was nothing to bury and nothing to burn, only the long cold monuments of a fleet that had chosen wrong, drifting forever on a road that had told them, for 400 years, to simply pass. He did not collect his dead. You cannot warm them. You cannot wake them. You can only leave them as a marker on the road, and perhaps that was the last thing the cold ship intended, that 200 frozen stalkers should drift the ledgerway as the most honest warning sign any road ever had. And the cold ship watched the two warm ships go. It did not follow. It had never followed anything in 4 centuries. It turned its long dark flank back to the empty crossing, and it closed its open ports one by one, the hundreds of slow, deliberate eyes shutting in sequence down the 4,000 meters of the hull, and it ran cold again, colder than the dark, until the Sahun instruments lost it entirely, and the ledgerway showed once more only a smudge of nothing that the careful would learn, after this, to route around. Behind it, the human convoy folded on toward its frozen colony, the quiet lantern in the lead, 1,100 meters of white hull marked with a plain blue cross, carrying tents and water and seed, and a surgeon who had finished the child first. The two warm ships came home to the Sahuhun, and that was when the real horror began, because the Sahuhun did not believe them. You have to understand how an empire of hunters receives the news that 209 of its finest went cold without landing a blow. It does not grieve. It cannot afford to. A predator that admits its prey can kill it is a predator that has stopped being able to eat. Grief is a thing for creatures that lose, and the Sahun did not lose, had not lost in 900 years, and could not begin now without the whole architecture of their certainty coming down on top of them. So when Vorkaleen brought long patience and the scout cold appetite back to the Sahun home reaches, and told the High Reaping Council exactly what had happened, word for word, with Senatiruk standing beside him, holding her grandmother's instrument and the recordings it had made, the council did the thing that frightened empires always do. They decided he was lying. Not lying to deceive exactly, lying to cover a failure. The council reasoned, in the cold rooms where the Sahuan made their decisions, that no force in the galaxy could cool a hunting fleet without warmth, because warmth was the weapon, the cold was only its absence, and a thing that killed with absence was a thing that could not exist. A weapon must put something out, fire, force, light, a striking thing that crosses the gap and breaks the target. A weapon that takes instead of gives, that wins by being colder and more patient than its attacker, was not a weapon in any sense the council had a word for, and the council, like the fleet, decided that what it had no word for did not exist. Therefore Vorkaleen had lost his fleet some ordinary way, an ambush, a reactor cascade, a coward's mistake, a hidden human war fleet that had struck and fled, and had invented the cold ship to hide his shame. They stripped him of his hunts. They took his private count off his hull, the long record from prow to engine ports, and ground the carving flat with their own tools, while he stood and watched. Because a hunter who loses a fleet and survives, and then tells a story no Sahun can accept, has earned nothing but erasure. They were going to take Senatiric's instrument and erase it too, the recordings, the 4th-century whisper, all of it, because the council had decided what was true, and the recordings disagreed, and when a record disagrees with a council, the council does not change. It grinds the record flat. They would have, and they were within an hour of it. Except that other things began to happen in the dark that the council could not explain. Because the Sahuan were not the only ones who hunted the Ledgerway. The crossing the humans guarded was a good road. It was a shortcut between the 4 empires, the kind of empty stretch where slow, soft cargo moved, and where slow, soft cargo moves, hunters gather. It was not only the Sahuhun who tracked warmth across the dark. The Vane hunted there, in their slow, patient packs. The remnants of the old cassock crossed it looking for stragglers. There were 3 or 4 powers in reach of the Ledgerway who, when they felt a warm, undefended thing crossing it, did exactly what the Sahuan had done, because that is simply what predators do when they feel the helpless cross open ground. For 400 years, the cold ship had let the merchants of all these powers pass untouched, and so all of them believed the Ledgerway was safe, and so all of them, sooner or later, sent a hunting party to take a warm, soft thing crossing it. In the months after Vorkaline came home disgraced, 3 more hunting parties from 3 different powers found warm prey crossing the Ledgerway, and did exactly what predators do. The first was a Vane pack of 201, who locked onto a human grain convoy and closed to feed and went cold, every one of them, in a span their own survivors could not measure, leaving 2 warm ships that had argued against the kill, and 1 Vane navigator who had refused to extend her lance. The second was a cassock remnant of 90, who fared no better, and came home as a single ship carrying a captain who had begged her admiral to turn around. The third was a bold pack of 40 from a power so small it has no name in your records, who had heard the rumors and decided the rumors were Sahuan cowardice, and went to prove it. And 40 went cold in the dark, and 1 came home. And that one had been the only voice in the pack to say leave them. They are only carrying the sick. Now 4 empires had a problem they could not name, and an enemy they could not find, and a road full of frozen monuments they could not explain, and the panic that began to spread through the high councils was unlike anything the galaxy had felt in living memory. Because the thing about an unknown force is that the not knowing is worse than the dying. An empire can plan against a fleet, it can plan against a weapon, it can plan against a rival it understands, even a stronger one, because understanding gives you somewhere to put your fear. It cannot plan against a stretch of empty space that swallows hunting parties whole and gives back nothing but cold drifting hulls and the ravings of the few who lived. The Ledgerway became a wound in every map. Traders crossed it without trouble and reported nothing wrong, which only made the councils more afraid, because what kind of enemy lets the merchants pass and takes only the warships? What kind of force could distinguish a grain hauler from a hunter, could let 10,000 peaceful ships through, and then erase the 1 fleet in 100 that came to feed, and do it without ever being seen, without ever firing a shot the instruments could record, without leaving so much as a scorch on the drifting dead? They sent scouts. The scouts found nothing, because the cold ship ran colder than the dark, and only ever woke for hunters. And a scout that comes only to look is not a hunter, and the cold ship let it look, and find a smudge of empty crossing, and go home with nothing. They sent unmanned probes, brave little machines packed with every instrument 4 empires could build, and the probes crossed and returned clean, because the probes came in peace, because a probe has no appetite and reaches for nothing warm. The councils studied the clean probe data for weeks and grew more frightened the longer they studied it, because clean data is the most frightening kind when you know, that a force out there has eaten 4 fleets. They sent, at last, A combined fleet of 3 empires, 2,000 hulls, the largest war fleet the 4 powers had ever agreed to assemble, an alliance that should have been impossible between rival predators, made possible only by a fear large enough to outweigh 900 years of mutual contempt. The combined fleet had orders to cross the Ledgerway in force, find whatever was killing their hunters, draw it out, and erase it from the galaxy. They came hot for battle, 2,000 hulls running their reactors at war pitch, the brightest blaze of warmth the Ledgerway had ever held, daring the unknown force to show itself. And here is the thing the empires never understood, the thing that turned their fear into something close to madness. The combined fleet of 2,000 crossed the entire Ledgerway, end to end, and nothing touched it. The cold ship watched 2,000 warships pass directly over it and did not stir, because the combined fleet, for all its guns and all its rage, was not hunting the warm. It was hunting the thing that protected the warm. And the cold ship, in whatever passed for its mind, did not count that as a hunt it was built to stop. There was no helpless thing on the road for the war fleet to feed upon. There was only the war fleet, looking for a fight, and the cold ship had never in 400 years gone looking for a fight, and it did not start now. It let 2,000 warships search the empty crossing for 30 days and find nothing, and then it let them go home, and it never showed them so much as a smudge. You can imagine what that did to the 4 empires. A force had erased 4 hunting fleets. The largest combined armada in their history had crossed the killing ground twice, run their instruments raw, dared the thing to show itself, and found nothing to fight. The enemy could not be located, could not be drawn out, could not be provoked. And yet the moment a single hunting party crossed the line and reached for warm, soft prey, that party died, every time, without fail, without survivors except the doubters. The councils ran out of explanations and began to run out of nerve. Some of them whispered that the Ledgerway was haunted by the dead of all the fleets it had eaten. Some said a dead god slept under it, an old thing from before the empires, that took warriors and spared merchants for reasons no living mind could parse. Some said the humans, but they said it quietly, and they did not say how, because to say how would be to say the rule, and the rule was the one thing no council could bear to speak aloud. There was, in those months, a great argument inside the High Reaping Council, and Senatiruk heard most of it, because she was not yet important enough to be kept out of the rooms, and not yet trusted enough to be sent away from them. The argument was not about whether the cold ship existed. The counselors knew by then, in the private part of themselves that every creature keeps, that it existed. The argument was about what it would cost to say so. To admit the cold ship existed was to admit that warmth was not the only weapon, and to admit that was to admit that the Sahuhun had been wrong about the deepest thing they knew, and a people who have built 900 years on a single certainty cannot pull that certainty out from under themselves without falling. So the loudest counselors did not argue that Vorkaleen was right or wrong. They argued that it did not matter whether he was right, because a truth that brings down the floor is worse than a lie that holds it up. Let the road be haunted, they said. A haunted road we can route around. A road that proves us wrong about hunger we cannot survive crossing even once. Senatiruk listened to powerful old hunters decide, openly, that they would rather their warriors keep dying on the Ledgerway than learn why, because learning why cost more than the warriors did. She had thought, before that day, that her people were proud. She learned, in that room, that pride is only fear wearing a harder shell, and that the hardest pride hides the largest fear, and that the thing the council feared most was not the cold ship at all. It was the rule. It was the unbearable simplicity of the rule. Because the rule did not say the humans were stronger. It said the humans were better, in a way the Sahun could copy at any time, and had simply never wanted to. And there is no insult a predator cannot survive except the suggestion that it could have chosen to be something other than a predator and did not. The Sahuna, who had lost the most, said the least, because the Sahun alone had a witness who knew the truth, and the Sahunan had ground the truth off her commander's hull and called it a lie. Senatiruk did not let them keep calling it that. She was young, and she was disgraced by association, and her grandmother's instrument was the only proof she had, but she had stood on a scout's deck and watched 200 stalkers go cold in 4 seconds, and she had heard a surgeon explain, plainly and without anger, exactly why. She knew what the empires could not stand to know. The unknown force was not unknown. The humans knew exactly what it was. They had built it. They had told everyone, every hour, for 400 years, what it was for, and how to be safe from it. And the rule for being safe from it was so simple that it was unbearable. Do not come to the ledgerway to drink the warmth out of the helpless. That was the whole rule. There was no fine print. There was no trick. Everyone who obeyed it lived. Everyone who broke it died. And 4 empires were panicking over an unknown horror whose terms had been posted, in plain words, on an open channel, for longer than any of them could remember, and the only reason it was unknown was that not one of them had ever thought the helpless might be worth listening to. There was one more thing that pushed her, and it was a small thing, and it was the kind of small thing that turns a life. Vorkaleen, disgraced, his hull ground bare, came to her quietly one night before she left. The old hunter who had refused to listen to her on the bridge, and had thrown her grandmother's superstition off his deck, and had ordered the ram that froze 200 ships. He did not apologize. Sahun, do not apologize. And an apology would have been an insult to what had happened. Too small a thing for 200 dead. He simply told her that he had been wrong, plainly, the way you state a fact, and that the only thing he had left to give her was the truth that he had been wrong, and that she should take that with her wherever she was going, because a young one carrying the truth would be called a liar, and it might help, a little, to be able to say that even the old hunter who had been right for 40 years had said with his own mouth that he was wrong. Then he left. It was the bravest thing she ever saw a Sahun do, and he did it in the dark, where no one but she would ever know. So Senatiruk did a thing no Sahun had done in 900 years. She broke from her own people, took her grandmother's instrument and its recordings, and carried them not to the Sahun Council, which had refused them, but to the one place the truth could not be ground flat. She carried them to the humans. The crossing alone nearly broke her, not from danger, but from the weight of where she was going. She flew the same road her fleet had died on, and she passed through the field of frozen stalkers, because the cold ship had left them where they fell, and the road ran straight through the middle of them, and Senatiruk flew her small warm scout slowly between 200 cold dark tombs, past the unfogged glass and the frost-rimed faces of warriors she had known, past Faithful Reach, past the hull where her commander had stopped to grieve, and she made herself look at every one of them, because she was about to ask the humans for the truth, and she had no right to carry a truth she would not first face. She broadcast the 6 words the whole way through. Ledgerway, Blue Cross, we are warm, and she meant them, and the cold ship in the middle of the field did not stir, and she crossed out the far side of her own dead fleet alone, and went on toward the rim. She crossed the rest of the ledgerway in a single small ship, warm and slow and afraid, broadcasting the 6 words she had learned by heart over and over, and the cold ship let her pass, because she came in peace. And somewhere in the cold, patient length of it, perhaps, the part that remembered every signal it had ever heard recognized the voice of the one Sahun it had spared on purpose, coming back across the road alone and unarmed, and let her through without a stir. She reached the human colony at the far rim, the frozen one the convoy had been saving, and she found it half-thawed now, tents pitched in long, bright rows under work lights, the seed barge's cargo already greening in heated domes, the dying becoming the living one warmed family at a time. The humans did not shoot her down. That was the first thing that undid all her certainty about them, because she had braced for it the whole way in, had told herself that a people who could freeze 200 ships would surely end one lone Sahun who dared approach their colony. Instead, a human relief captain met her scout at the edge of the colony's light, an old man with tired eyes and grease on his hands, and he looked at the heat reader of a people who hunted his kind, and he did not reach for a weapon, and he did not curse her. He asked if she was hurt. He asked if she needed warmth. And then he led her, a Sahuhun, a hunter, into the warm, bright colony she had come to plead with. And Senna Tiruk walked among the very families her fleet would have eaten, and not one of them turned from her, because the humans had decided long ago that the road was the place where hunger met its limit, and the colony was the place where it was simply set down. And she stood in front of Dr. Hella Marn, who was still there, still working, with her hands still smelling of cold and blood, and Senna Tiruk asked the surgeon a question that no hunter had ever asked a human. She asked, "Will you let me tell them the truth, so they stop dying?" And Dr. Hella Marn looked at the young Sahun heat reader who had hesitated, who had listened, who had argued, who had been spared on purpose, and had spent every day since trying to be worth it, who had crossed the killing road alone, to ask a healer for help on behalf of the very people who had ground her own commander's record flat. The surgeon looked at her for a long moment, and what she saw was not a Sahuan, and not a hunter, and not an enemy. She saw a creature that had come warm and afraid, and asking to be saved. And there is only one answer a surgeon gives to that. She said yes. The humans gave Senna Tiruk one thing the empires could never have taken from them, and it was not a weapon. It was the recording. The whole of it. 400 years of the cold ship's whisper, every hour of every day, the same patient promise broadcast into the empty crossing, anyone may pass who comes in peace. We are only here for the warm ones who hunt. The humans had kept it all, every hour of it, archived, complete. 4 centuries of a single sentence spoken into the dark. They had never hidden it. The empires had simply never bothered to listen, because listening to the helpless is not a thing predators are built to do, and the whisper had always come on a soft channel, an old one, the kind no warship ever scanned, because no warship expected the weak to be saying anything worth hearing. The most important message in the 4 empires had been playing on an open frequency for 400 years, and the only beings who had ever tuned to it were a few human relief captains and one young Sahuan heat reader who had kept her grandmother's strange old instrument out of love. Dr. Hella Marn handed Senna Tiruk the 400 years and told her something the young Sahun carried for the rest of her life. She said, "Your people think we erased 4 fleets. We did not erase anyone. We have not raised our hand once. The thing on the ledgerway does not strike. It receives. Every hunter that died reaching for it, drinking on it, ramming it, pouring fire into it. It took back exactly what was thrown, and it gave it to no one, and it kept the cold for itself, and it let the warm go free. We did not have to do a single thing except be cold, and wait, and tell the truth on an open channel for 4 centuries. Your empires are panicking over a horror that has never once moved toward them. The horror is the mirror. They are dying of their own reach. Every fleet that froze because it reached for the helpless on a road that begged it not to, and the cold it met was only the exact measure of its own hunger turned back. She said, "Take it home. Not to your council. They will grind it flat, the way they ground your commander. Because a council that has decided a thing cannot bear to learn, it was wrong, and the easiest way to stay right is to destroy the evidence and the witness both. Take it past them. Put 400 years of our whisper on every channel in 4 empires, and let them hear, in our own plain words, that the door was never locked. It was only ever shut to the ones who came to feed. The fear they are dying of is a fear of a thing that told them, the whole time, exactly how to live. You cannot argue an empire out of a fear like that, but you can play at the recording, and you can let 10 million ordinary souls who cross that road safely hear, in plain language, why they were always safe, and then the council cannot grind it flat, because you cannot grind flat a thing that everyone already holds in their own hands. So Sennacherib went home, and she did not go to the council. She went over them. She took her grandmother's instrument, which could speak as well as listen, and she crossed back into the Sahuan reaches, and she put 400 years of the cold ship's whisper onto every open channel at once, raw, unedited, the patient promise repeating and repeating, and underneath it, the 6 words, and the surgeon's plain account of what the ledgerway was, and how to be safe from it. She did not encrypt it. She did not sell it. She did not bring it to a council chamber where it could be debated and buried. She gave it away to 4 empires for free, the way the humans had given it away for free for 400 years, broadcast wide and open and unstoppable, and there was nothing the High Reaping Council could do to grind it flat, because you cannot grind flat a thing that everyone is already hearing. The panic broke like a fever. It did not break into peace. It broke into something stranger and quieter, and harder for a people of hunters to bear than the panic had been. The 4 empires heard, in the plain words of a surgeon, that the unknown force that had erased their hunting fleets was not unknown at all, had never been unknown to the ones who built it, and operated on a single unbearable rule that any child could follow. And the empires had to sit with the fact that they had assembled the largest armada in their history and crossed the killing ground twice, and sent 2,000 warships to hunt a thing that had been broadcasting its name and terms, in plain language, every hour, for longer than their councils had existed. They had been deaf on purpose. The horror had never hidden. They had simply never been able to imagine that the weak would be the ones with something to say, and that one failure of imagination, that single refusal to listen to the helpless, had cost them 4 fleets and taught them nothing until a disgraced heat reader forced the lesson into their ears. There was no treaty. The humans did not ask for one. They did not send envoys. They did not demand tribute or apology, or the punishment of the powers whose fleets had hunted their relief columns. The cold ship did not change. It still ran colder than the dark on the ledgerway, still whispered its 4-century promise into the empty crossing, still let every trader and pilgrim and lost soul pass untouched, still woke for one thing and one thing only. But the hunting parties stopped coming, not because the empires forgave the humans, and not because they stopped being predators, but because every hunter in 4 empires now knew, in the surgeon's own plain words, exactly what waited on that road for anyone who came to drink the warmth out of the helpless, and knowing it took the appetite away. You cannot hunt a road that has told you, for 400 years, that the only prey on it is you. A predator can face a stronger predator. It cannot face a thing that will not chase it, will not fear it, will not so much as notice it unless it reaches for the weak, and then takes back its hunger and leaves it cold and whole and drifting as a warning to the next. Vor-Kalin lived a long time after that, longer than a disgraced hunter should have wanted to. The council had ground his count off his hull, but after the whisper went out across 4 empires, after everyone heard the truth he had carried home and been called a liar for, They could not pretend he had failed in some ordinary way anymore. They came to him, the same counselors who had ground his record flat with their own tools, and they offered to carve his count back, the long-honored record from prow to engine ports, every hunt restored. He refused. He had it left bare. He said a hull that had carried a true account of the Ledgerway did not need a count carved into it, because he had finally understood what the cold ship had understood for 4 centuries, that the dark does not need promises, and it does not need numbers. It needs witnesses. A number on a hull is a thing you carve to frighten the dark. A true account carried home is a thing that changes it. He had spent 40 years adding to a count that meant nothing, and 4 seconds losing a fleet that meant everything, and the rest of his life he spent making sure the witnesses outnumbered the liars. When he died, it was not in a hunt, and not in shame but old, in his own reaches, having become the one thing a hunter is never built to be, which is a keeper of a truth he would rather not have learned. Sennacherib lived longer still, and she kept her grandmother's instrument all her days, and she crossed the Ledgerway many times, always warm, always slow, always in peace, and the cold ship always let her pass. She became, in time, a strange figure among the Sahuan, neither honored nor exiled, the heat reader, who had broken from her people to save them, whose recording had stopped the dying, whom the young came to quietly when they wanted to know what had really happened on the road, and not what the council had at last grudgingly agreed to admit. She taught the young to listen, not only to warmth, but to the other voices in the dark, the way her grandmother had taught her, and a generation of Sahuan heat readers grew up able to hear a thing the old fleet could not, which was the difference between a road that is empty and a road that is being kept. Once, late in her life, she stopped her small ship in the empty middle of the crossing, where the smudge of nothing was, and she broadcast the 6 words she had carried since she was young, and she added something of her own. She thanked it. She did not know if it heard. She told it that the dying had stopped, that the road was quiet now, that her people crossed it in peace, and would go on crossing it in peace, and that she was old, and that she had wanted, before the end, to say to the cold thing in the dark that she had been listening, all those years ago, and that someone had carried it right. It never answered her. It had only ever spoken once, in a surgeon's voice, to a fleet that came to feed, and Sennacherib understood that the silence was not coldness. The silence was the whole point. The cold ship had nothing to prove, and no one to impress, and no count to carve. It only had a road to keep, and it kept it, and it would go on keeping it long after every empire that had panicked over it had forgotten why. As for Dr. Hella Marn, she never left the Rim colony. The frozen world she had crossed the Ledgerway to save became, in the years after, a thing worth crossing for. A green and lamplit place, where the families the convoy had carried put down roots in soil warmed by the seed barge's gift, and the surgeon stayed and grew old among them, finishing one child after another, season upon season. She did not consider herself the hero of anything. When the young of the colony asked her about the cold ship, which they did, because every child on every human world that bordered the dark grew up hearing of it, she told them the same plain thing every time. She told them that the cold ship was not a weapon, and was not a god, and was not a monster, that it was only the shape their grandparents had given to a single hard promise, which was that the warmth of the helpless would not be taken on their road, not by anyone, not ever, and that the way to honor a thing like that was not to fear it, but to be the kind of people who never needed it to wake. She told them the cold ship slept best when no one made it work. She told them the proudest thing a human could ever say of the Ledgerway was that nothing had happened there, again, for another quiet year. And mostly nothing did. That was the strange, soft triumph of it. the kind no anthem is ever written about. The road stayed quiet. The hospital ships crossed it and crossed it and crossed back, white hulls and blue crosses, and the cold ships slept, and the four empires routed their fears around a smudge of nothing, and told their haunted stories, and out past all of it, the helpless of a dozen peoples crossed the ledgerway in safety, without ever once knowing whose promise kept them. That was how the humans had wanted it. A guardian that needed thanks was a guardian half made of pride, and the humans had built theirs out of something cleaner than pride. They had built it out of a memory of 900 frozen souls, and a decision, made in grief, to answer that grief, not with 900 deaths of their own, but with 400 years of a door held open to everyone, except the ones who came to feed. Here is the part the galaxy still does not know, reader, and the part you now carry. To this day, the four empires do not have a name for the thing on the ledgerway. The humans never gave them one. In the councils and the maps and the warnings, it is still listed as an unknown force, a horror, a hauntment, a thing that erases hunting fleets for reasons no one can fully explain. The empires prefer it that way. It is easier to fear an unknown than to admit the truth, which is that there was never any mystery at all. The humans knew exactly what it was the whole time. They built it. They told everyone what it was for. They posted the terms on an open channel and kept the promise for 400 years. And the only beings who ever died of the mystery were the ones who could not bear to believe that mercy might also be patient and cold and entirely unafraid of them. The empires would rather have a haunted road than a true one, because a haunted road blames the dark, and a true road blames the hunger. And only one of those is a thing a predator can keep hunting around. So the rumor lives on. In 100 ports across 4 empires they still tell it, the unknown force on the ledgerway, the thing that swallowed fleet after fleet and left them cold and whole and drifting, the horror no scout could find and no armada could draw out, the mystery the wise root around. And every time the rumor is told, somewhere in the room there is one quiet soul who has heard the 4-century whisper, who knows the 6 words, who knows that the answer was always there for anyone willing to listen to the helpless, and that one quiet soul says nothing, because the truth is not theirs to force, only to carry, and they carry it the way Sennatiruk carried it, the way Vor-Kalin carried it, the way the cold ship has carried it for 400 years, patiently, and without anger, and without end. The ledgerway is open today. Slow, soft cargo still crosses it. Hospital ships still cross it, white hulls marked with a plain blue cross, carrying water and tents and seed, and surgeons who finish the child first. They cross it warm and unafraid, because they know what keeps the road, and they know it is theirs, and they know it does not need a name to do the only thing it was ever built to do. They wave to the smudge of nothing as they pass, some of them, an old human habit, a nod to the cold, patient thing that has watched over the crossing since before any of them were born, and the smudge never waves back, and they would be unnerved if it did. Somewhere in the empty middle, colder than the dark, a long, patient shape runs silent and keeps its eyes shut, and whispers once an hour into the void, a promise 400 years old, waiting, without hurry, without anger, without end, for the next warm thing that comes to hunt the helpless, and learns, in the time it takes a heart to beat twice, exactly why the humans were never afraid of the dark.